Everyone. I'm Liz Zelt. I'm the project leader for our Books and Coffee event this year. I'd like to thank you all for attending our event this week. And if you were here last week, welcome back. This year marks the 70th anniversary of Books and Coffee. And if you would like to be notified about all Purdue Student Union Board events, go ahead and follow us on our social media, which is at PSUB Events, and any other information will be there as well. And if you are attending virtually, go ahead and take a look down in our chat for the links to our raffle trivia, along with the attendance code, the attendance link to check in for today. And if you are in person, make sure to go ahead and look for that QR code. We have it over at the entrance for you to scan for the trivia as well. So this week we are talking about Naomi Novik's Spinning Silver. So the reviews are in. So a little bit about Spinning Silver. Spinning Silver is a new young adult fantasy from Naomi Novik. Reads like a fairy tale you already know in your bones. But this fairy tale lets its heroine be both monster and princess, both gold-hoarding Rumpelstiltskin and Vidorous Miller's daughter. Actually, to be precise, Spinning Silver's heroine, Miriam, is a money lender's daughter. Her father isn't a very good money lender, afraid of seeming harsh or cruel. He has given away his family's money to people with no intention of paying it back, and now they are on the brink of starvation. So Miriam takes it upon herself to get the money back, going from door to door, wrapped in coldness, and demanding payment from all those who owe debts to her father. After that, Miriam concludes dispassionately, I was the moneylender in our town, and I was a good moneylender. Her astonishing business skills earn her a reputation for being able to spin silver into gold, and thereby catches the eye of the king of Steark. The elfish personification of winter is the story's Lithurian analogue fantasy world. What ensues follows the familiar rhythm of fairy tale logic. Wishes manifest themselves in unsettling literal ways. Trees planted on the grave of Vitoris mothers bestow gifts. Everything comes in sets of three. But it's Novik's great gift to be able to write characters who seem to create their fairy tale patterns organically, without being prodded into place by the shape of the story. Miriam is fundamentally a businesswoman and a bargainer. So when she begins to enter contracts with the trickster Steark, each night in exchange for my rights, I will ask you 5 questions. It feels true to her character. Their agreement also bears a striking resemblance to the one from Beauty and the Beast, in which the Beast demands that Beauty allow him to ask her a question at the end of each night and always ask her for her hand in marriage. But the trope's renaissance hits you second. The character moment comes first. Spinning Silver is a spiritual successor to Novik's 2015 novel Uprooted, for which she won the Nobel for Best Science Fiction and Fantasy Novel. While the book doesn't take place in the same universe, they're both set in fantasy lands with Eastern European influences, and they both play with fairy tale tropes without becoming literal retelling. The novels are both revolve around the same romance trope in which a feisty young girl is kidnapped by an immensely powerful older man whom she must change for the better. The power dynamics here are questionable, to say the least, but the way Novik insists her heroine's agency makes the story palatable, and the conclusion is undeniably satisfying. What makes the trope more or less work in the end is that Novik's girls are not just heroines. They are great, they are also monsters, even if they have their reasons for what they do. Novik's world building is rich and detailed, with a magical system that makes emotional sense. It is also a religious world. Miriam and her family are Jewish. That's part of why they are moneylenders. And Miriam's religious practice is a fundamental part of her arc. Jews are surprisingly rare in medieval fantasy, despite how much of America's best fantasy writers are Jewish. And Miriam's Jewishness is a welcome addition to the genre that makes her world feel wide and lived in. Novik's voice is simple and evocative, but it can occasionally feel cluttered. Miriam is one of 6 narrators, all of whom speak in the first person without any signposting of who they are to help the reader distinguish between them. It gets confusing. Still, the emotional terrain of the book stays clear and compelling, even as the sprawling cast of characters form and betray one alliance after another. Spinning Silver follows in the tradition set by Robin McLeigh of fairy tale worlds populated by fairy tale characters who feel like real people, and of princesses with strength and agency. But it moves the tradition forward. It's a brilliant new installment from an author who poises to become one of the definite young adult voices of her era. So next we have a little clip here to hear a little bit about, to meet our author of this book.
Hi, I'm Naomi Novik, and I'm the author of Spinning Silver. That's fairly easy because I actually have a master's in computer science.
Oops, sorry about that. Let's try that.
Hi, I'm Naomi Novik, and I'm the author of Spinning Silver. That's fairly easy because I actually have a master's in computer science, so I'd be doing something with software, building software somehow. These days I get a lot of it done on my phone where I'm traveling around, waiting in offices. It's just so convenient. But where I like to get it done is sitting on the couch while my daughter has a book of her own right next to me, and the two of us are reading side by side. The key to an amazing story is building great characters and letting them take you where they want to go. Oh, I'm always having great ones. I just had a wonderful encounter at my last signing in DC. One of the artists who contributed a piece of fan art to a Temeraire book that I did, which collected various pieces of fan art, actually came to the signing, and she brought a new painting that she'd done of Mulan with a dragon in the Temeraire universe.
All right. And now after hearing a little bit of a review and meeting our author, we're going to go ahead and listen to an audiobook of the first chapter for anyone who hasn't read the book recently or hasn't read it at all.
Penguin Random House Audio presents Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, read for you by Lisa Flanagan. Chapter 1. The real story isn't half as pretty as the one you've heard. The real story is, the miller's daughter with her long golden hair wants to catch a lord, a prince, a rich man's son. So she goes to the moneylender and borrows for a ring and a necklace and decks herself out for the festival. And she's beautiful enough. So the lord, the prince, the rich man's son notices her and dances with her and tumbles her in a quiet hayloft when the dancing is over. And afterwards he goes home and marries the rich woman his family has picked out for him. Then the miller's despoiled daughter tells everyone that the moneylender's in league with the devil. And the village runs him out, or maybe even stones him. so at least she gets to keep the jewels for a dowry. And the blacksmith marries her before that firstborn child comes along a little early. Because that's what the story's really about. Getting out of paying your debts. That's not how they tell it, but I knew. My father was a moneylender, you see. He wasn't very good at it. If someone didn't pay him back on time, he never so much as mentioned it to them. Only if our cupboards were really bare, or our shoes were falling off our feet, and my mother spoke quietly with him after I was in bed. Then he'd go, unhappy, and knock on a few doors and make it sound like an apology when he asked for some of what they owed. And if there was money in the house and someone asked to borrow, he hated to say no, even if we really didn't have enough ourselves. So all his money, most of which had been my mother's money, her dowry, stayed in other people's houses. And everyone else liked it that way, even though they knew they ought to be ashamed of themselves. So they told the story often, even or especially when I could hear it. My mother's father was a moneylender too, but he was a very good one. He lived in Viznia, 40 miles away by the pitted old trading road that dragged from village to village like a string full of small, dirty knots. Mama often took me on visits, when she could afford a few pennies to pay someone to let us ride along at the back of a peddler's cart or a sledge. 5 or 6 changes along the way. Sometimes we caught glimpses of the other road through the trees, the one that belonged to the Starek, gleaming like the top of the river in winter when the snow had blown clear. "Don't look, Miriam," my mother would tell me. But I always kept watching it out of the corner of my eye, hoping to keep it near, because it meant a quicker journey. Whoever was driving the cart would slap the horses and hurry them up until it vanished again. One time, we heard the hooves behind us as they came off their road, a sound like ice cracking, and the driver beat the horses quick to get the cart behind a tree. And we all huddled there in the well of the wagon among the sacks, my mother's arm wrapped around my head, holding it down so I couldn't be tempted to take a look. They rode past us and did not stop. It was a poor peddler's cart covered in dull tin pots, and Starek knights only ever came riding for gold. The hooves went jangling past, and a knife wind blew over us. So when I sat up, the end of my thin braid was frosted white, and all of my mother's sleeve where it wrapped around me and our backs. But the frost faded, and as soon as it was gone, the peddler said to my mother, "Well, that's enough of a rest, isn't it?" As if he didn't remember why we had stopped. "Yes," my mother said, nodding, as if she didn't remember either. And he got back up onto the driver's seat and clucked to the horses and set us going again. I was young enough to remember it afterwards a little, and not old enough to care about the Starek as much as about the ordinary cold biting through my clothes and my pinched stomach. I didn't want to say anything that might make the cart stop again, impatient to get to the city and my grandfather's house. My grandmother would always have a new dress for me, plain and dull brown but warm and well made. And each winter a pair of new leather shoes that didn't pinch my feet and weren't patched and cracked around the edges. She would feed me to bursting 3 times every day, and the last night before we left she would always make cheesecake, her cheesecake, which was baked golden on the outside and thick and white and crumbly inside, and tasted just a little bit of apples. And she would make decorations with sweet golden raisins on the top. After I had slowly and lingeringly eaten every last bite of a slice wider than the palm of my hand, they would put me to bed upstairs, in the big cozy bedroom where my mother and her sisters had slept as girls, in the same narrow wooden bed carved with doves. My mother would sit next to her mother by the fireplace and put her head on her shoulder. They wouldn't speak. But when I was a little older and didn't fall asleep right away, I would see in the firelight glow that both of them had a little wet track of tears down their faces. We could have stayed. There was room in my grandfather's house and welcome for us. But we always went home because we loved my father. He was terrible with money, but he was endlessly warm and gentle, and he tried to make up for his failings. He spent nearly all of every day out in the cold woods hunting for food and firewood, and when he was indoors there was nothing he wouldn't do to help my mother. No talk of woman's work in my house. And when we did go hungry, he went hungriest, and snuck food from his plate to ours. When he sat by the fire in the evenings, his hands were always working, whittling some new little toy for me or something for my mother, a decoration on a chair or a wooden spoon. But winter was always long and bitter, and every year I was old enough to remember was worse than the one before. Our town was unwalled and half nameless. Some people said it was called Pakal for being near the road, and those who didn't like that because it reminded them of being near the Starek Road would shout them down and say it was called Pavis for being near the river. But no one bothered to put it on a map, so no decision was ever made. When we spoke, we all only called it town. It was welcome to travelers, a third of the way between Viznia and Minask, and a small river crossed the road running from east to west. Many farmers brought their goods by boat, so our market day was busy. But that was the limit of our importance. No lord concerned himself very much with us, and the Tsar and Koron not at all. I could not have told you whom the tax collector worked for until, on one visit to my grandfather's house, I learned accidentally that the Duke of Viznia was angry because the receipts from our town had been creeping steadily down year to year. The cold kept stealing out of the woods earlier and earlier, eating at our crops. And the year I turned 16, the Starek came too, during what should have been the last week of autumn, before the late barley was all the way in. They had always come raiding for gold once in a while. People told stories of half-remembered glimpses and the dead they left behind. But over the last 7 years, as the winters worsened, they had grown more rapacious. There were still a few leaves clinging to the trees when they rode off their road and onto ours, and they went only 10 miles past our village to the rich monastery down the road, and there they killed a dozen of the monks and stole the golden candlesticks and the golden cup and all the icons painted in gilt, and carried away that golden treasure to whatever kingdom lay at the end of their own road. The ground froze solid that night with their passing, and every day after that a sharp, steady wind blew out of the forest, carrying whirls of stinging snow. Our own little house stood apart and at the very end of town, without other walls nearby to share in breaking the wind, and we grew ever more thin and hungry and shivering. My father kept making his excuses, avoiding the work he couldn't bear to do. But even when my mother finally pressed him and he tried, he only came back with a scant handful of coins and said in apology for them, "It's a bad winter, a hard winter for everyone," when I didn't believe they'd even bothered to make him that much of an excuse. I walked through town the next day to take our loaf to the baker, and I heard women who owed us money talking of the feasts they planned to cook, the treats they would buy in the market.
All right. And then one last video for us. If you like Spinning Silver, here is the book trailer for Uprooted that is also by our author Naomi Novik.
Foolish girl. Do you think you can simply walk out of my tower, run home to your village, and sink back into safe obscurity? How little you understand. Ignorant of your own power. There's nowhere safe. There's no way to hide. And there are worse things in the world than being uprooted.
All right. Then before I go ahead and turn it over to our speakers for today, want to go ahead and mention again, if you are online, make sure you check out that attendance link and go ahead and get yourself checked in. And everyone, make sure you get that trivia link as well for a chance to win a copy of Spinning Silver. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Angelica Duran.
Great. Okay, so it looks like we are running on time. Hi, I'm Angelica Duran, professor of English, comparative literature, and religious studies here at Purdue University. But more importantly for now, I am the English department faculty liaison for the 70-year anniversary of Books and Coffee. So welcome. Last week, the first book we featured for each of the 4 Thursdays this February was the young adult fantasy fiction Mortal Sight by Sandra Fernandez Rhodes. This week, week 2, we have another novel of the same genre before we turn to poetry in week 3 and a not young adult novel in week 4. You can find out the details as well as access the recordings of all of this month's Books and Coffees on the English department webpage, as well as through BoilerLink. But for now, let's turn to this week's selection, Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I imagine that more than a few of you among the audience will have read Spinning Silver since it is this school year's big read selection. Sharing her thoughts on this award-winning book is Amina Gabrielova, who teaches courses on Russian language, culture, and literature here at Purdue. So without further ado, I will go black and I will let Amina share screen with her PowerPoint. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So I imagine everybody else.
So let me start. Hello, everyone, and let me start my my little PowerPoint presentation about the novel Spinning Silver and about Naomi Novik. On this photo that comes from Naomi Novik website, we see her opening the door to her office and inviting us into her world. We see her library at the background. She is deeply immersed in literature. And we also see her collection of masks. We're invited to do some role-playing, game, theater, entertainment. Naomi Novik is a best-selling, award-winning author of 13 novels and several short stories for young adult and adult audience. She produces work designed for entertainment, in her own words, but she also takes this work very seriously. She creates fantasy fiction, including novels that combine history and fantasy. She is also very active in fan fiction, an online phenomenon where participants, both amateur and professional writers, write continuations or different versions of their favorite books and read and comment on each other's work. We will see how this fan fiction experience manifests itself in Spinning Silver. I also want to note that Naomi Novik is very passionate about writing and about authors reading, discussing, and supporting each other compositions. She wants her readers to be fervently involved with her books, and we feel this intensity in Spinning Silver. So our author grew up in the New York area. Her education was in the field of literature and computer science, and her first jobs were in computer game design. Then she realized that what she enjoyed most of all was writing. She still is a big fan of computer games, but now she has switched to writing novels full time. And she prefers writing in series. Now, let me give you a brief overview of her works. Her first series, Temeraire, for the name of a dragon, who is one of the main characters. And Temeraire is a French word that means bold or daring. This series includes 9 novels published between 2006 and 13 and is set during the period of Napoleonic Wars, late 18th to early 19th century. And I will show you a couple of book covers a little bit down the line. This series is a blend of history, adventures, and magic. The main characters are the dragon and a British naval officer, a young man called Will Lawrence, and they will have many exciting adventures together. To give an idea of the breadth of author's vision, I will cite a review from Amazon.com page, from the booksellers page, and the reader is clearly excited about the series. This is what he writes or she writes. After reading the first 2, I ordered the rest of the series. I'm getting a better idea of the world during Napoleon's reign. First book is set at sea and in England. Second book, at sea and China. Third book, China, the Silk Road, Turkey, and Eastern Europe. And fourth book, England, sea, and Africa. A very good read. So this reader noted a very important feature of Naomi Novik's art. It's both educational and entertaining. You read, you have fun, you enjoy it, and then you learn a lot. This sweepingly broad view of world history and geography probably has roots in the perspective of computer games. Later on, Naomi Novik narrowed down her focus quite a bit. Her next project was a graphic novel series set in a school of magic, a graphic novel series about superheroes in a school of magic, and where the main character is a girl. So now the author has switched to female protagonists. And the title is Will Supervillains Be on the Final? Only one volume of this graphic novel came out. Probably writing a graphic novel as opposed to a regular novel with its rich description, rich narrative was a little bit frustrating. What followed? Were the 2 novels with Eastern European theme. So here Naomi Novik, she narrowed down her focus. And Uprooted from 2015 and Spinning Silver 2018. These 2 novels are not a series. What they have common is location. They are both located somewhere in Poland, in a fantastic country based on Poland near the border of Russia. But they're clearly linked by the cover design. We see our female protagonist in the center, in the frame, which is a medieval book or comic book type frame with scenes of life, plot details, main characters. And finally, after these 2 very successful novels, last year, Novik's latest is a new series called The Scholomance, and its first book, A Deadly Education, is again set in a school of magic, again has a female protagonist. So we can see 2 main directions taking shape in Novik's world. Historical fantasy on one side and superheroes in a school of magic setting. Now let's go to Spinning Silver. Let's go to Spinning Silver. At the very beginning, Novik indicates that she wants to tell us the real story behind the well-known tale of Rumpelstiltskin. she writes, the first sentence, the opening sentence of the novel is, the real story isn't half as pretty as the one you've heard. This is, guys, what authors of fan fiction do. We clearly see here the influence of this fan fiction practice. Rewriting or creating a continuation or an updated version of the original story. So in her version of Brothers Grimm Rumpelstiltskin, Novik ties the tale to a more realistic historical situation and along the way brings in parallels to Slavic and Russian tales. Now about Russian and Slavic tales. Russian and Slavic tales, fairy tales, any fairy tale for that matter, are focused on an individual family, personal growth of a young person, his or her initiation, overcoming a life-threatening danger or a life-changing test, and eventually joining the adult society, forming a new family. What I found particularly fascinating about the novel, The Spinning Silver, is how Novik uses traditional motifs and story patterns and combines them with real history, in particular, the history of Jewish people in Eastern Europe. Naomi Novik parents came from Eastern Europe, and in one of her interviews, she mentioned that they brought with them books of tales, and she grew up with Slavic and Russian fairy tales, Polish tales, and stories of Jewish life. Let's look at the meaning of the title. In the original Rumpelstiltskin, the one that triggered her imagination, the king orders the girl to spin straw into gold. In Novik's book, there is no spinning in that sense of the word. In Novik's own word, this is not a retelling of the fairy tale, but the fairy tale was the grain of sand in my oyster, and the book formed around it. Spinning here has other meanings. First of all, spinning as telling a story, then spinning as working metal and creating jewelry. This is how Miriam is able to obtain the gold for Starry King. There is no magic from the part of Miriam here. She rather makes good business decisions. So spinning has different meanings. Now let's look at the time frame and location. The location of the story, Polnia, a fantastic country, is loosely based on Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a state in Central Europe that bordered in Russia, a powerful and large state in 16th, 17th century that was one of the largest states in Europe and home to its largest Jewish population in Europe. The timing of the story, we think it's probably early 17th century, and it's not random. The background of cold summers and winter kingdom has some historical truth in this, some historical background. At this time, we had a so-called volcanic winter, a climate situation that followed the eruption of the volcano Huayna Putina in Peru in 1600. And the impact of the cloud of dust was so great that it led to a series of exceptionally cold winters in Central Europe, caused dismal crops and the worst famine in Russia in 1601-1603 that was followed by social unrest and wars. Time of trouble. This period is called the time of trouble. And this situation can give us an explanation to this winter kingdom and its antagonism to the world of humans And this idea that the country needs balanced seasons, balanced temperatures throughout the year. Let me switch to another. Yeah. Here is my slide. This is I want to show you. We see here the covers for the stories from the series of Temeraire, the Temeraire series. And we see the dragon, and here in the middle, we see those totally realistic pictures of the locations. The ship, the location probably in Europe, the location probably in China. And on the right hand side, I want to show you the miniature from the 15th century chronicle called Nuremberg Chronicle. And this is the city of Krakow. This is the historical capital of Poland with its beautiful Jewish quarter that was located on an island. And we see Krakow surrounded by a wall, and we see the Jewish quarter surrounded first by a river, then by a wall, and it has several bridges to it. And it certainly reminds us of the descriptions of the city of Vyshnya and of a Jewish quarter in Spinning Silver. So those descriptions seem very true to its historical originals, with the moats, with the bridges. Probably there is somewhere here an underground passage that leads to a safe space. Now the motif of the glass mountain, in our case the ice mountain, as a location of another world, also a very typical fairy tale motif. Now let's look again at the use of language. The king of Starik, the one who kidnapped Miriam and took her to his winter kingdom. The word Starik in Polish and in Russian, in both languages, means an old man or an old person. This usage of a foreign word in a novel reminds us of the name of the French word, of using the French word téméraire. It seems to me that actually Starik Kingdom is a variant, is a version of the Kingdom of the Dead, a very common location for fairy tales and mythological stories. Visiting another world or the world of the dead that can be located underground or inside a mountain is very common in Russian as well as other tales. This another kingdom is organized as a regular human society. We know that Starik Kingdom is highly hierarchical, strictly structured, includes classes of farmers, fishermen, servant, aristocracy. Now, this is a cold and sunless world. Its inhabitants are pale, wild-haired people dressed in different shades of color gray. And those descriptions certainly remind us a little bit of the dead. The Starik king himself, white, also reminds us. Let me move on to my next parallel. Yeah. On this illustration, we see a picture of Baba Yaga hut. We're talking about the hut on the border of the human world and the magic world. And this hut on the border of day and night, human world and winter kingdom, plays such a prominent role in Naomi Novik's novel, and it certainly has parallels in Russian fairy tales, like Baba Yaga, the magic witch who lives in this hut, We have a version called Jerzy Baba in Czech folklore, Baba Yaga in Polish folklore. Again, a very typical character, typical situation in Slavic tales. And this illustration on the left probably will be familiar to most of us. Chernabog, or Slavic deity and misfortune, featured in Disney's Fantasia. The gleaming eyes of Chernabog in Spinning Silver remind us of, these gleaming eyes in Fantasia. Chernabog, the dark deity, and the king of Starik are the two supernatural characters that personify mythological forces of chaos and destruction on one side, and order and social and legal structure on the other side. Chernabog wreaks havoc and death around himself, as is very expressively depicted in the scenes of ravaged rooms in Spinning Silver. The king of Starik, on the other hand, is a responsible and dedicated ruler who presides over an orderly state and fights for the very existence of his people and his territory, which redeems him a little bit in the eyes of the reader and in the eyes of Miriam. My next slide is the illustration to the Three Sisters situation. Now, the Three Sisters situation is very common in Russian and Slavic fairy tales. And what we see here on one corner and the other corner of the screen are illustrations for different fairy tales. Here, this is a story of Phineas the Bright Falcon, three girls, and he will marry the youngest one. And on the other illustration, we see the three princesses of the underground kingdom, another three sisters. And in the middle here, we see a painting, 19th century painting by Russian artist Mesaedov, three sisters reading poetry in a park. And here in the upper corner, a play by Anton Chekhov. We all know this play, The Three Sisters. Again, the three sister situation. So what I want to say is how typical, how important the whole situation is in Russian and Slavic culture. And Naomi Novik takes it, but she gives it a totally different interpretation. We have three girls who are the three main characters of the novel, but at the beginning, they have basically nothing in common. They represent different social classes, different ethnic groups. All three are not beauties, and interestingly, in Slavic and Russian fairy tales, women are rarely discussed in terms of their looks. We know that they're beautiful, but how beautiful they are, we don't know. No details are given. In the book, Wanda is strong as a bull, Miriam is small and skinny with a prominent nose, Irina is mousy and unremarkable. Her only attractive feature is her thick, long hair. Wanda is a Polish peasant, Miriam is a Jewish merchant class girl, and Irina is a Lithuanian princess. But all three girls are very much on their own in their life. They have to struggle for their survival, their own survival, the survival of their families, and they have to make alliances in order to survive. And toward the end, they establish very close relationship. They get to know each other out of necessity, but at the end, they build trust and respect, and they become like sisters. They become like sisters. And I want to start with Wanda. So Wanda is a Polish peasant girl from a very poor family. Mm, Her father is a brute and who drives his wife, Wanda's mother, to death with his brutality. And at the beginning of the novel, Wanda is just numb from all the cruelty she experiences at home. And she even doesn't love her two younger brothers. He is only attached to a white tree that grows on her mother's grave. The tree is the only protection for Wanda and her brothers. And this is a very typical fairy tale motif, Slavic tales in particular. Motherly love that is embodied in a tree. At the end of the story, Wanda will play a crucial role in the culmination of the novel, the fight between Starik and Chernabog, when she helps putting Starik in chain. And this scene, the culminating scene, is shown through Wanda's brother Stepan's eyes. And now let me move to my next slide. Two illustrations, actually, they come from cartoons, from animated films. Here we see the motif of the older sister taking care of younger brother. An older sister that saves her younger brother or is followed by her younger brother. This is very typical. Very typical. Now, my next slide, and this is my last slide, will be about outstanding strong female characters. Slavic tales are remarkable for their strong female characters, from outstanding warrior queens to wide maidens and girls who speak in riddles. There is clear connection between speaking in riddles and asking questions when Miriam is involved in asking questions and receiving answers from the Starik king. Now, the character of Miriam is at the center of the novel. She is a Jewish girl who will eventually marry a king of mythological Winter Kingdom. Eventually, Miriam, who, like many other strong and resourceful fairy tale characters, marries a supernatural creature and a king, and she becomes a Persephone-like character, only the other way around. She will reside in the Starik kingdom, the underground kingdom of the dead, during summer, and she will be able to visit her mother and her family during winter time. And what we see here, we see the illustrations. This is again the illustration for Finis, the bright falcon. And we see this girl who traveled, who went to, who had to travel in order to find and to save her fiancé and her husband. So here she plays the role of this strong and active hero in order to save him, the young man. And this other tale, this is the illustration for the tale centered on the queen called Maria Marievna, a strong warrior queen. Again, these illustrations show us strong Slavic female characters. So another motif that reminds us in Russian of Russian tales is a triple test for Miriam when Starik 3 times orders her to exchange silver for gold. Now let me go to the third girl in the novel, and this is Irina, the Duke's unloved daughter who has to marry Tsar Mirnatius. She has to gather all her intelligence, courage, and remnants of family magic. in order to fight Chernabog, who possesses Myrnatius. And here we see a different fairy tale motif, a very universal one, more universal even than Slavic one, Beauty and the Beast. The girl who needs to free her husband from evil spell. But here again, we see how Novik subverts and reinterprets a traditional motif. Normally, the beauty character has to deal with an ugly animal-like suitor. But Myrnatius is handsome, his ugly demon hides inside him, and Irina needs to drive out the evil spirit from inside of him. Naomi Novik characters are very clearly defined visually. The girls have colors assigned to them. Wanda has yellow hair, she's strongly built, wears ill-fitting clothes. Miriam wears earthly colors, a warm brown dress embroidered with red and green flowers. Irina's color is gray, and she's, again, as I said, she's mousy and unremarkable, but her beautiful hair. And the Starik King, very distinctive, is all made of sharp white angles, and so on. At the end of the book, all the adventures come to a happy denouement. However, when I finished the novel, I started thinking, what will happen later on in Wanda's life? How Miriam will be able to juggle the duties of Starik Queen and her love to her family? What will happen to Irina and Myrnatius? So I think that Naomi Novik might want to write a continuation and to continue her series. There are a lot of, interesting possibilities here.
I like that open-ended ending, Amina. Thank you so much for that. Can you go ahead and stop sharing, and then I will close up on what I found a very interesting talk, which I used with a very interesting PowerPoint. Thank you for sharing those images.
You're welcome. Let me try. Oh, let me try and do that. Oh, here I am. Stop share. Yeah. Yes. I stopped sharing.
Great. So we will see. I will spotlight for everybody as I call to an end our week 2 of the 70th anniversary of Books and Coffee. And I invite all of you to join us next week when our book will be Poems 1962 to 2012 by Louise Gluck, our most recent U.S. Nobel Prize in Literature laureate, followed in week 3 by Tommy Orange's There, There, in which we'll actually have the author as one of our speakers. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. And if PSUB has anything to add, great. And if not, we'll see you next week, we hope.
All right. Yep. Just a few notes. We'd like to thank Vaughn's Bookshop for their generous book donation again this week. So we have 3 prize giveaways of a copy of Spinning Silver. So make sure you fill out that trivia for a chance to win that. And you will also be getting an email with a short evaluation regarding this event. If you could fill that out, give us your feedback. We would really appreciate that. And once again, thanks for attending this week. And we hope to see you guys all next week again.